Welcome back to the Michigan Football Network. And once again, it is draft week, the best week of the year, in my opinion, because it's always fun just kind of leading up to the draft. I know, and we're going to get off into a little tangent here before we start this mock draft, just because why not? It's always fun. But with that, I see so many people just being like, oh man, let's just get to the draft already. I'm so sick of the chatter and blah, 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 blah. And I understand that if you've been talking about the draft since, uh, what would it be, December, January ish when the playoffs started, just because your team wasn't very good and now this is all you've heard about for, 6 months almost. So I understand it there. But as a Lions fan, obviously we got sent home before the playoffs happened. But still, I haven't really been too draft specific. We were very free agent specific for the Lions for quite a while. So we've only been talking draft for, a month or two now. So me personally, I love this week. I love the leading up to it. I love watching draft day, the day of the draft or the day before, usually the day of for me, watching old drafts. I don't know if you guys do that or not, but that's something I love to do. Just go back and check out some things. So, without further ado, our final mock draft is here. Okay. And this is a predictive mock draft. So, this is what we think is going to actually happen. And bear with me because this is based on a lot of different intel, a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different ways that this draft can go, and that's what I love about this draft more than others. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I feel like this draft is so much more uncertain than drafts have been in the last few years, and I think that's just the lack of blue chippers. I can't remember who I was listening to, but I was listening to a podcast today or yesterday, and they basically just said like, yeah, at 4 or 5, we'd normally be like, it's probably these two guys. They need these positions, and these guys are blue chippers. We're pretty much past that at like 3. So it's kind of a odd scenario here where we really don't know, what's going to happen on draft night.
It feels like it's a scheme versatility thing that's happening, as well as the expansion of really, I mean, human evolution, I guess, not to get too deep, but the whole idea that athleticism and profiles are very different. We talked about this with the tackle position, but I feel like it's true for a lot of these positions. It's like look at edge or look at a lot of the other positions where it's hard to know exactly what people will go for, because some of these guys we don't even really know where they'll play, as far as like, well, where all is Arvell Reese going to line up, where how is Sonny Styles going to be used in the NFL. I think certain teams will have a good vision for those players, same with those offensive linemen that will be assigned to a certain spot. Oh, he's definitely going to be our right tackle. He moves well, he pulls well, he's going to be a guard, he's going to be our left tackle, what have you. But the teams are going to have the vision for that, but it's a little harder to predict the team's vision in that sense, what exactly they're looking for and how they feel like they fit in with the other 10 guys that they're putting them with.
Yeah, I would definitely agree there, especially with the tackle class. I feel like I specifically have said that, but I'm sure we've all kind of said that throughout this process that, it kind of depends on scheme fit and what you like because all these guys' grades are very, very similar and very close. So it just depends on what you want. But with that, James, you got anything to add here before we officially kick this thing off?
I just want to say, because obviously mock drafts are fun and we use logic and whatnot, and I don't want to quite say favoritism, but what we would do and stuff like that. There's always at least one team, if not more, but there's always at least one team every year that just reaches for a guy in the top 10 that you thought was going to go 17 or 18, Cleveland Farrell, something like that. And all of a sudden, from that point on, your mock's like, well, almost feel like it's a March Madness bracket that gets busted in the first round because you're like, well, I didn't see that happening. And like, with no intel or anything else like that, I just have a gut feeling like, what if the Cardinals just go Ty Simpson at 3? Like they just need a quarterback, and they teams love to reach on quarterbacks. Trey Lance, I'm spacing on the guy from BYU. Was Zach Wilson? Was it for the Jets?
Zach
Yeah,
Wilson. Yep.
yeah,
Okay,
the 50
and
yard throw from his knee. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
just like these guys go all the time in the top 5 and stuff. So I'm like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but just simply what if? And I'm sure somewhere in there, some team is going to fall in love with some prospect, and it will shake the draft up. But Only time will tell, and thankfully, that's just tomorrow.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. It's kind of funny watching back the 2007 draft, talking about drafts I watched earlier. Obviously Calvin Johnson went number 2 in that draft, but then from like 3 to like 9, it was dudes I've never heard of before, which is kind of crazy considering it was 2007. So that's really, around when I was watching football. So the fact that like 6 out of the top 10 picks didn't pan out is, just proof in the pudding that obviously we never know what's going to happen with who's getting picked, but we also never know what's going to happen and who's going to be good. And then, with
Especially with
that, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to tap in, especially with that particular draft because Jamarcus Russell went number 1. So
Mhm.
number 1 was arguably the biggest bust of all time, and number 2 was a top 5 receiver of all time. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's the Adrian Peterson draft too. So you got a hell of a running back over there as well.
Yeah, it honestly was like Calvin Johnson. I think it was he went 2, Peterson went 8. In between those two were guys literally every name I was like, I have never heard that name before in my
Might
life.
have to look this up just out of curiosity.
It was wild, dude. Like I consider myself a pretty, knowledgeable person when it comes to NFL history, and I was sitting there going, I don't know any of these guys at all whatsoever. But with that said, not to waste any more precious time here, let's get this mock draft started here. Obviously, number 1. Okay, first of all, let's shout out the mock draft sim we're using today, fanspeak.com. Shout out to you guys. The link will be in the description. I've played around with this mock draft quite a bit, or the simulator quite a bit. I really like it, honestly. This board is really good. I think it's a little bit better than ones I've seen in general. So
Who was
check
that
that
at
out.
17?
What's that?
So who was that at 17 when you scrolled down the prospect list? Oh, just checking. Okay, we're good. Something caught my eye, that's all.
Right. See, and that's the thing I love is that, okay, another aside. James has so much love for Owani that he's just like, Lions should draft him. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just draft him. And look, I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, if we draft him, what are we going to do with, Frazier and Mahogany and Scruggs and all these guys that play interior? And I'm not saying I'm totally against it, but it's like,
I
that
think
would be
Frazier could
nuts,
at
I
least
think.
compete with Borum for right tackle at that time. But in terms of like the Mahogany's guys and Scruggs and all that, they just are backups.
Right. No, I get that. And I agree with Frazier. I do like the idea of him playing tackle, which, we've talked about a few times on this show previous. But without further ado, kicking off this mock draft, we are taking Fernando Mendoza at 1. I feel like this is the only pick in this entire draft, outside of maybe pick 14, that we go, yeah,
Who's going
obviously
there?
that guy. Ioane, your man. So obviously I feel like, oh, looks like we lost Ryan for a second here.
Oh, he's there.
Okay. It said his recording had stopped, so I think we're all good still. But with that being said, obviously Mendoza's going 1. I don't think that's even a question at this point anymore. And if you guys have anything to add there, I honestly doubt it, but go ahead. I'll leave the floor open.
I'll let him speak first. I know it's
Well,
Indiana
I was
guy.
going to let you go, James, because obviously I had the Raiders, and so I got to pick him. I think I don't know 3 different times in our mock drafts, but yeah, it is interesting the discrepancy between 1 and the rest of the picks. This is and 1 as far as quarterbacks go, and number 2 because Jason and I talked a little bit about it on his appearance on my show, but. It kind of to your point, James, we don't know where Ty Simpson can go because somebody is going to reach for him. I think that's probably somewhat likely given that he's the number 2 quarterback. But this is a pretty big deficit between number 1 and number
Absolutely.
2. And Fernando's got everything that you want out of a quarterback. He's got the arm strength. He's got the arm talent. He's got very good accuracy. And I think the main thing, the thing that started to go on my radar is, man, I know he's a minority owner, but he has some control. But pairing Fernando with Tom Brady and having that be a guy in your Rolodex that you can call if you're Fernando Mendoza, who's already a pretty mature guy, I think that's going to be a nice combination. And I think he's going to help turn he's going to be a leader, a young leader for this team early on. Plus, he's got Kirk Cousins there, obviously, too. So he's got a couple veteran guys that have made the most out of what they were. And this will be an insult to every Michigan fan, and I don't mean it as one, but Tom Brady started as a, 6th round pick. Fernando starting at 1 overall. I think Brady would say, hey, he's working with a lot here. Let's mold him into something.
Yeah. I mean, Brady was on again, off again starter in his time in Michigan with Henson. So, I mean, also he was picked 199, so I guess together they're 200. But no, that's one thing I love about doing a show with you two, and also I don't want to say hate, but sometimes get annoyed with you guys steal all the good points, because I was going to bring up, well, he is far and away the best quarterback in the draft. I do think Simpson's maybe even 2 tiers below. It's not often that you see a franchise kind of doing an old school method with benching a number 1 overall pick and giving them time to grow. For the vast majority, the Cam Wards, the why am I spacing? Caleb Williams and all those guys that went number 1, Bryce Love, and I'm sorry, not Bryce Young. Sorry, Bryce Young. I'm just like Bryce Love. Like
You were
Jordan
combining
Love
him and
Bryce
Jordan
Young
Love.
combined.
Yeah.
But the last 3 overall picks, first overall pick quarterbacks, just kind of tossed into the fire, just like old school Stafford and Sam Bradford the year after. So this is taking like the Patrick Mahomes sat behind Alex Smith his rookie season. So with Tom Brady being in the front office, I do like that they are kind of going, because obviously he was mentored by Bledsoe. So I do like the fact that they are kind of going more old school with the approach, but also not overthinking it and just taking your franchise piece.
Yeah, personally, I'm definitely lower on Mendoza than you guys are. I do think he is worth the number 1 pick. However, it's not his physicals that worry me. It's the offense he played in at IU. And I know, Ryan, you can kind of add to this a little bit as an IU fan. They did not ask him to do a lot. I mean, it's a lot of RPOs, a lot of one read throws. And obviously, being what, 6'5", 240, 250, he's a big dude and he's got a big arm. But personally, I agree with you, James, that I think Ty Simpson is 2 tiers below, but I still don't put Fernando in that like elite quarterback prospect tier. But again, obviously with where we're at, with number 1, he's the best quarterback on the board. And I do think he's worth the pick in this draft. But that's just
Yeah,
me.
he's no Bryce Love, but
Right.
Exactly. He's 2-1. That's like a Frankenstein's monster. He can't be as good as that.
yeah,
And that
as soon
might
as
be
they
a
said
good
it, I'm like,
quarterback.
"Oh, all right."
Well, I'm curious, Jace. I understand the point for sure. I'm curious where you would put him. So they had that that very good class a couple years ago that had Drake May and JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr. All those guys. Where would you put him in that group? Because I want to compare him to kind of a glut of quarterbacks that are a little bit different.
So I would say I would have, Caleb and May 1 and 2, probably 1A and 1B. And then I would have Mendoza at like 3. And then I would have JJ and Penix right under him. I would say, like, as a prospect, Caleb and May are in their own tier. Fernando's in his own tier, and then JJ and Penix. I just wasn't a huge fan of JJ or Penix coming out. And I think JJ's issues are the same that we see from Mendoza, but he doesn't have the extra physicals to, kind of get you over that hump.
That's why I picked that draft, because I was curious kind of how far away you would put him from JJ. I think he did a little bit more than JJ, but yeah, I can see what you're saying, especially because we talked about this in one of the mock drafts, but there's a lot of his offensive pieces that are coming out with him, and we'll be able to see like, well, okay, Omar Cooper's looking like he'll be, a first round pick and a star, potential star in the league. Surratt, the tight ends coming out, Nowakowski, both running backs. So they had a lot of talent. It wasn't like the Antoine Randall L days, which is an ancient reference for this show because I'm the oldest one. But that was my quarterback when I arrived there, and he had no
Receiver?
help. He was a quarterback in
I know.
college, which he was amazing. I mean, he was unbelievable as a quarterback. But yeah, so I'll be curious to see kind of how all of that ties in, and because he's not going to have nearly as many weapons with Vegas either. So to your point, he's going to have to do more there.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why they're sitting him, right? Kind of like what we talked about. Brady probably sees that and understands he's going to need some time to get that processing to an NFL, worthy point. And I do think it makes a lot of sense if that's your hang up with Mendoza to sit him behind a guy for like Kirk Cousins for maybe even just 6 games and let him kind of figure out the offense and learn from, to your point, a guy like Tom Brady. But with that said,
Sorry. I say
go
with
ahead.
Genty and Bowers there, that's a nice little offense for a rookie to step in. I know he could use a receiver, but
Yeah, and I think they'll definitely get him one in this draft. And obviously, it sucks they got rid of Jacoby Myers because I feel like he would have been perfect for Mendoza.
yeah.
But I think they did that in assuming he would leave in free agency anyway. So without further ado, the Jets are now on the clock, and we are going to stay with what we've been saying for quite a while, Arvell Reese. I know there's a possibility David Bailey goes here, but I just think Aaron Glenn is looking at this and going, okay, both of them are a project. I think we can all kind of agree on that. Do I want the guy that can do 2 things at a high level or one? And I think that's kind of, Aaron Glenn's thought process along with how the Lions are thinking this offseason as well. Versatility, man, that's the name of the game. And if you can do more for me on the field, I'm going to take you over that. So obviously this isn't what I would do necessarily. I would take Reese, but I do think the Jets will end up taking Reese, in my opinion. But James, I'll give it to you first this time around since, Ryan went first last time.
Yeah, I think this might be as locked in as Mendoza at 1 for me, just because every mock has him. I think he is the best defensive. I guess I'll just say piece because I think he's more of a linebacker than a D end. But I've seen online everyone call him a D end or an edge. So um, I think Glenn will be able to kind of utilize him to maximize his capabilities. And I don't think there's too much else to say on that, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. Ryan, you got anything to add on that one?
The one thing that I'm thinking with, obviously they've got the 3 Ohio State players, defensive players that'll likely go in the top 10 range. I'm really curious to see their career trajectories in general because they all played on the defense together. And I'm the more we talked about Sonny Styles and kind of his flexibility, obviously it's different than Reese's, but between Styles and Downs, I don't really know which one is the best one out of these 3. I think this is the best pick. I'm not arguing for any of the other guys, but that's a storyline that I think in 19 years, when you look at this again, like the 2007 draft that I was perusing after you said that, with names that I recognize because I was getting out of college then, but it'll be interesting to look back and see what these guys did over the course of their career, because same thing we were talking about with Fernando, these guys all played together. So who was carrying who, with McDonald included as at defensive tackle and some of the other guys that were on that defense. It was a star-studded defense, and now they're all going to separate and we'll see what they do in the league here.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because, I do agree. I think they're all number 1 at their positions in this draft. And obviously, James, you said, you see Reese as more of a linebacker. I personally see him as more of an edge that will play linebacker at a high level simply because, like, his edge tape is what is getting him drafted this high, I think. Simply just because he didn't have a ton of, snaps there. But when he did, man, he showed some real flashes. And then I think obviously you're getting a pretty good linebacker either way. So I also think the more he plays the position, the more he'll learn the position, and the more he'll just, completely change the game, I think. Like, I know Micah Parsons, everybody kind of forgets that he was a linebacker coming out, man. Like, people thought he was going to be an NFL linebacker, and here we are. He's the best edge probably in the entire NFL.
Y-
I mean, I know Myles Garrett had a good year, but I think Parsons is 1B
He's obviously up
if
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
if Myles Garrett is 1A. So
I remember my college Michael Parsons comparison was Luke Kuechly, so that quite didn't work out. Um, because I thought he was going to be an athletic cover linebacker, and they put him in the trenches, and I remember thinking to myself that won't work out, and yeah, it did. It did very well.
yeah, and maybe that's hopefully for the Jets, that's the same way this works out for with Reese. But with that said, the Cardinals are now on the clock, and this is when the draft kind of starts getting fun, in my opinion. We've heard a lot about a trade down. The Cowboys are a team that have been, talking about trading up to this spot for a guy like David Bailey. The Chiefs as well, thinking about trading up for a guy like Ruben Bain, which is kind of funny because I haven't really heard the Chiefs and David Bailey together too much, nor have I heard the Cowboys and Ruben Bain. But both teams are trying to trade up for three for those players. So, just kind of a funny way of, teams looking at things differently. But with that, I do believe, well, before we get to the pick, Jeremiah Love has also entered the conversation here at number 3. Personally, I do not see it. I've heard a lot of things about, the new head coach in Arizona really wanting to run the ball. He wants a top tier running back. But I don't think you go pay Tyler Algier. You have Trey Benson, and you restructure James Conner to keep him, to then draft a running back with the number 3 overall pick and waste him for at least 2 years. So I don't think they're going to go Love here. I know that's kind of been the hot thing the last, couple days, but I will say, in my opinion, the closer we get to the draft, the more smoke screens get thrown around. So take that with what you will. I have the Cardinals picking David Bailey here. Obviously, in our mock drafts, I went Ruben Bain, but I do think they're going to lean Bailey. I think the NFL might probably sees Bailey as a better prospect. I would disagree, but I think the Cardinals will go Bailey here. Ryan, what do you have to add on that one?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of highlight one of the things that you said, that it is weird the way the information flows on something like this, because after all of the different, the combine and all the pre-draft bowls, after those finish, there's kind of a period where information gets put together and people kind of know the most. They hear things at the various, pro days, and they're talking, everybody's talking to each other. They're all milling around together. And then, so it's like, it kind of gets to a peak, and then you would think it would get to a peak right before the draft, but that's actually not true. It's like we get the peak of accurate information, and then misinformation makes the pool a lot more muddy. So yeah, that's what we have to remember, especially as Lions people. The Caden Proctor thing out there, other things. You got to figure out what's true and what's not. But we'll find out tomorrow, as James said. But yeah, I think that's a good summary that you had on Bailey. And yeah, Love there just seems too duplicative. I think they've got enough running backs, and I do agree on the edge capability as far as the NFL being higher on him than maybe the three of us are. One thing that we never talked about is we have kind of, I think the news came out kind of when we were doing these mock drafts with Bain and the off the field issues stemming from the car accident. I'm curious if that's going to affect anybody's view on him, because character issues get thrown around. That's obviously something from the past that had already happened before any of the evaluation stuff. But I'm curious if that would make or break. Maybe if they were close on Bain and Bailey, maybe that kind of kicks it over the edge. You never know with how some of these teams evaluate.
Well, I kind of love that you bring that up, because Bailey actually has a lot of off-field issues as well. So
it's true.
It's kind of an odd situation here where I feel like teams are really not sure where to go. And that is a good point. We really haven't brought the Bain or the Bailey issues up too much on the show. And obviously, Jalen Carter had a somewhat similar situation. Obviously, I think Jalen Carter's was a little bit more detrimental, obviously, with there being a death and everything like that. But Ruben Bain obviously got himself into some real trouble as well. So not really what you want to see, but that is a good point. I do think that could factor into that a little bit. And obviously the Bailey stuff is more technically on the field because he's doing dumb shit on the field, but it's still dumb shit. So it's like, all right, we kind of got to factor that in. But with that, James, do you have anything to add on this one?
The only thing to add that just puts a little different flavor and it's not just repetitive, I almost feel like there's not completely, but a slight aspect of um, Trayvon Walker and Hutchinson because I know Hutchinson had the short arm debate that some people said with Bailey at the combine, and I'm sorry, with Bain at the combine, and then Bailey's got all the tools, all the athleticism like Walker had. So I kind of feel like it's traits and predicting a ceiling versus college production.
Yeah, and I totally get that. And the last thing I'll say about Bailey is people are gonna kill me for this. I don't really see it on film. His burst does not pop off the screen to me. A lot of people are, talking about him as this like elite athlete, Von Miller type of edge rusher. I just don't see it, and he's undersized a little bit, so he's gonna have some issues in the run game. So I personally am a lot lower than most on Bailey. So that might be why I also like Bain a little bit more. But with that, the Titans are now on the clock, and this one is a little bit tough too because they need O line, they need D line, they need defense in general, they need some weapons on offense. And I'm going to take what I think is the best player left in the draft period, and that's Jeremiah Love. I know we just talked about, the Cardinals shouldn't take Jeremiah Love because XYZ. Okay, that's fine. The Cardinals don't have a quarterback. If I'm the Titans, I'm trying to get my quarterback Cam Ward as many weapons as I can, and I think a run game helps the quarterback out more than anything. You can have awesome receivers. It's like that meme with Joe Burrow when they drafted Jamar over Sewell. You can have awesome receivers, and your quarterback can't get the ball to him because his run game and his O line is not good. The Titans have kind of worked on their O line quite a bit. They obviously still need some receivers, but I think this is a good draft to get one in the second round. Obviously, you're not drafting one at 4, in my opinion. I don't see that at all. But Jeremiah Love, best player on the board, makes a lot of sense for them. Adds some help for their young quarterback. James, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, when we were going through our mock drafts, I was in charge of Tennessee, and Love was almost my pick every time. I know one time I went O-line, but as you mentioned, you got to get Cam Ward some help. Love is a kind of a jack of all trades running back. He can help you in the screen game. He can help you with the short routes, even if he lines up in the slot. And obviously, as a running back, he'll help you in the ground game. And this is a fairly deep draft, in my opinion, for O-line. And outside of Love, I don't think there's another first round running back out there. So this is a great opportunity for them to take their offensive weapon and then kind of pack out the O-line in later rounds.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And it's like, you're taking the best player probably in the draft, in my opinion, here. And I think they look at it like, well, we could take a running back in like the third round, go maybe offensive line here. But I know they feel pretty good about their O line. So with that, though, Ryan, what do you got to add here?
Yeah, they as you guys mentioned, they allocated a lot of resources to the offensive line. I think they'll need some bodies, but I don't think they need it here. Maybe, well, I was going to say outside of the quarterback position, but probably the biggest difference between 1 and 2 here at running back, as James was saying. And so if you're not going to get a depth running back and want to kind of go knock it out of the park with which the Titans are in need of a franchise running back, then you're pairing them with Ward, right around the same age, similar timelines, that drafted in back-to-back years. So I feel like this could be a pairing that could help turn the franchise around. And then, yeah, you just build in front of them. I know it's the reverse of what we've been doing, but they do have a decent offensive line that they can build off of.
Yeah, and like we all kind of said, setting that offensive line up, then getting a run game. Now you can add some receivers, and you have a real offense instead of receivers first. Usually that takes a few years for the offense to actually start working. So now the Giants are on the clock, and I think this is another, kind of obvious pick. I'm going to go Sonny Styles here at 5. I know he's a linebacker, okay? And I know this is early for a linebacker. However, I think Harbaugh would see him. I'm not saying he is Kyle Hamilton, okay? However, I think Harbaugh could see him and go, I could use him in similar ways inside of my defense. And he's kind of a Swiss Army knife, too. So I really like the addition here of Sonny Styles. And honestly, the Giants, they have a lot of needs, but linebacker is one of the most obvious ones on their team. And I think Styles is just, a game changer. So with that, Ryan, I'll pass it over to you first on this one.
I had the Giants in our drafts, and this was pretty much my main consideration. I think you could have a consideration with Downs because they do need some help on the back end, and he's also pretty versatile. But it's hard to argue against the versatility of Styles because I think like I said earlier, we look at Reese as versatile, but I think we need to look at Styles the same way. And with a defense that's going to be in a rebuild mode, they've got the edges, but they got rid of their franchise defensive tackle. They're going to need to rebuild in this draft. They've got a lot of assets to do it, but I don't think this is a reach for linebacker because you're kind of putting linebacker in quotes because it's that scheme versatility that we were referring to earlier that I think kind of improves his draft stock and value.
Definitely. James, what do you got to add there?
Yeah, I agree, and I'm glad you brought up the Reese kind of connection because I see Reese as more of a linebacker, but he's the edge linebacker hybrid. I see Styles as a linebacker safety hybrid, so kind of the back seven instead of the front seven. But he is just overall a tremendous talent. I remember very early in the process thinking maybe, just maybe, if he's there at 17, because at that point in time he was going like 24, 22. That was pre-combine, so I'm like, maybe the Lions need to replace Anzalone. But then he blew up at the combine, and now here we are talking about him going fifth. So obviously that's out the window, but he is a tremendous player, and I hate complimenting Buckeye, so that's all I'll say on that.
With that, speaking of Ohio, Cleveland is now on the clock. And I think I'm going to turn this draft on its head right here. Okay. And I know this is predictive, right? Which obviously I'm not 100% sure this happens. I'm going Reuben Bain at 6 to the Browns. Okay. And here's why. Number one, Myles Garrett just led the NFL in sacks last year. Number two, they just restructured his deal to make him more tradable. Number three, Reuben Bain is a top 3 player in this draft, in my opinion, that fell to you at 6. Now, we obviously see Carnell Tate go here all the time. I don't think that happens. Honestly, it was between Bain and Maui Goa for me, and I went Bain just because I feel like the Browns did a pretty good job at rebuilding their O-line through free agency, and I think they can get O-line a little bit later, especially because they need interior O-line. So I go Bain here, thinking the Browns are thinking for the future, and obviously he's great with Myles Garrett, but I'm thinking after Myles Garrett at this point. So with that, James, what do you got to add on this?
I love it just because it does fill into my drafting to kind of solidify a strength, make something go from good to great. Because I do like Bain, and he's my personal number one D end in this draft because I like him more than Bailey as well. But I like the idea of pairing him up with Garrett just because how the hell do you stop that? Kind of goes back to what we said last podcast. Like, if you don't want to face him, draft him. And I would not want to face a defense with Bain and Garrett, not to mention all the other guys they have on that defense. Their defense is absolutely loaded. So while Tate was my pick when I was controlling the Browns, I absolutely see this. At the same time, in those other mocks, Bain was gone off the board before this would have happened.
Exactly. And, kind of mentioning what, Ryan talked about a little bit earlier with his off the field stuff. That's kind of why I had him dropping a little bit. I know we've had, talks that he might go all the way down to 9 or even possibly 13. I do not see that.
17?
He is not. Right. That would be awesome. But he ain't making it past 9, I don't think. At the very least, that's where he gets drafted. But with that said, I do think they would do this to pair him with Garrett. And think about it this way. Next year, they have picks to try to get a quarterback. And now you have an uber elite defense. You draft another receiver, and you're looking pretty good. Ryan, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I'm just going to go with a little bit of an equation. You guys covered it well. But the idea here, if we're comparing him to Tate, is to me the drop-off from Bain to the edge that you could get at one of the later picks. They have a decent amount of resources. Is bigger. I'm doing an SAT equation than Carnell Tate to the later the guys, the receivers they're available at the same place. That's kind of how I looked at that as you were doing it.
Yeah, honestly, that was exactly my thought process. I thought to myself, early second round pick, what's going to be there? Obviously, some decent edges, but I think you can get a pretty good receiver a little bit later, whereas Bain is just a beast. So now the Commanders are on the clock. And this is another, I think, somewhat obvious one, with him being on the board. Caleb Downs here makes too much sense. I mean, I'm about to say a name, and James and I, and Ryan, you might be up there with us, is going to give us some PTSD. Will Harris, remember him?
Oh yeah,
that's the Commanders' starting safety right now. So I don't know, Lions fans, if you're listening to this and you remember that name, you remember a lot of blown coverages and just bad football from Will Harris. So thankfully for the Commanders, we go ahead and get Caleb Downs here, the safety from Ohio State, to get him off the field and more to where he belongs in a depth spot, because I do think he's a solid depth piece. But with that, Caleb Downs might be one of the best players in the draft period. I know there's been a lot of ups and downs talking about him versus, Thieneman. I have Downs way higher. I know I like Thieneman a decent amount, but Downs, dude, people, it's like they forgot 2 years ago. People were talking about him like he was Jeremiah Smith of safeties, when he was over at Alabama, and then he went to Ohio State and didn't really play worse. But for some reason, people kind of looked at him, let me rephrase. The last few weeks, it seems people are starting to look at him a little different for whatever reason. But we go Downs here at 7. Ryan, what do you got to add on that one?
We talked a decent amount about these 3 Ohio State defensive players that'll likely go in the top 10. And Downs is looking like maybe he might end up being the third one taken, but I still think there's a chance that he ends up being, it'll be hard to compare across the board, but the best one or comparable in the NFL. And that's nothing against Reese or Styles. I just think, like you said, there's some things that kind of change with Downs, but I don't necessarily think the tape didn't change, the accomplishments didn't change. So I think he'll be very versatile. And man, talk about an upgrade. If you're going from Will Harris to Caleb Downs, my little equation that I did before, apply that to improvement as far as what you have on the field. And I don't think they can improve a position better than that if you're the Commanders.
Yeah, totally agreed there. James, what do you got to add on this one?
I'll share my quick Will Harris story. The very first Lions training camp I ever went to, at the end, anyone who out there who spent a training camp, players will come over to certain areas and you can get their autograph. I was waiting by the railing to see who came over, and it was Will Harris. I got out of line and left. I figured it just flat wasn't worth my time. I'll let a kid or some other fan, get what they wanted more than what I would want from him. But with that being said, going to Caleb Downs, I like him a lot. I think he's a top 3 to 4 player in the whole draft. I do worry a little bit about his knee, and I feel like that's why he dropped a little bit. They mentioned something about a degenerative ACL, and maybe I am just having some Kirby Joseph PTSD. Granted, I know it's not Kirby's ACL, it's something else, but in terms of just like athlete and player, because he didn't miss any time with it for what it's worth. They just gave him some testing at the combine, and they're like, by the way, you got this. And but just player wise, like I think he can be, although slightly different style, but that Kyle Hamilton-esque like impact guy from day one. And I know Washington has Santa still over there, so their defensive back room is going to be pretty nice with some Big Ten talent there.
Yeah, and so I'm not so sure how real that report was, unfortunately, about Downs' knee, because in the last month we've seen a lot of recanting about that report, and the guy who initially reported it deleted it completely from his website. So it's kind of
I
a
did not
weird,
see that.
yeah, it's kind of a weird scenario where it could be true still, but we don't really have all the facts. And even when it was true or, in the zeitgeist still, I didn't really think it was that big of a deal because really all it means is he's going to need his ACL reconstructed at some point in his career. And I mean, if you think about it, it does suck, but it's like, okay, it's not that bad like Kirby's knee. So I do think he still gets drafted relatively high, even though that could be a concern. With that though, the Saints are now on the clock, and I was between two players. And really the reason I went the way that I did is because he's normally not on the board, and it's a big need for the Saints. Carnell Tate, the receiver from Ohio State, pairing him back up with Chris Olave. Obviously, they are two completely different receivers, and that's exactly why I picked Tate here. Give Shucks some more help. And Maui Noah was the guy I was looking at, but I just feel like their O-line's pretty set. You could have put him at right guard and then kicked Ruiz to left, but I just think that at this point you might as well take the skill players. So that's why I went Tate here. James, what do you got to add on this one?
Yeah, I like it. Like we mentioned, kind of similar to Tennessee taking Love. You got to give your young quarterback some weapons, and Olave isn't what it used to be. At least he's not putting up the numbers he used to. So whether that's the inconsistent quarterback play, giving
He
me a
had his
weird look.
best year of his career this year.
Oh, well, that's how under the radar it happened. So egg on my face.
I think I only know that because I have him in so many fantasy leagues, and I've been
Okay,
sitting here
I had him
waiting and
not
waiting and
last
waiting
year,
for
the
him to
2
do
years
anything.
prior, and he screwed me. So,
Yeah.
um, okay, so he's coming up. Well, maybe that's the Shuck experience then. Maybe he kind of went down the last 2 years prior to that, and now that they had I don't know if I want to call him a franchise guy, but at least someone who's there for now, he may develop into the franchise guy. This will give him a hell of a running mate and take that kind of coverage off him because I do think Tate is a number one receiver.
And he's definitely going to be their X, and I think that's perfect. You have Olave as your Z receiver, and now you just kind of need a slot guy, which you can pretty easily find. So now, Ryan, what do you got to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, you guys were talking about kind of how Olave was kind of sneaky good last year. Same with Shook. I think there's some belief in that team in him, even though, up and down, he was a rookie, didn't know what to expect. But now you're giving him two legitimate receivers here and clearing some space. I like the move, especially in comparison to the line thing, because, these guys are flexible and some of them can move, but you're also, you're also affecting the ability of that lineman that moves too. You're moving them to a different position. We don't do this with a lot of other players. We don't say, oh, okay, you're playing, that on this, you're playing on this side of the defensive line. Let's move you. Obviously they switch them around a little bit based on position. But as far as offensive line, you're used to working in a unit and moving those guys around. It's not always the easiest. So I like the idea of a plug and play guy that is a vast improvement, especially with getting rid of Shaheed and kind of shedding. They've shedded a lot of receivers over the last few years, so that it's time to have a new tandem and new era there in New Orleans to pair with their young quarterback.
Definitely. And now we have the Chiefs on the clock at pick 9, and I'm not going to take too much time here. We're going Maui Noah. They have a big need at right tackle. I personally see Maui Noah as a right guard. However, I think he can play right tackle, and now with Trey Smith next to him, I think it'll give him a little bit easier job. And I mean, think about that offensive line now. Pretty big strength there for Kansas City now, whereas last year was kind of a weakness. And I know a lot of people have them going, what receiver or oh my gosh, Bain. That's the other guy. That's what I was thinking. A lot of people have him going Bain. Obviously Bain doesn't make it here for them, but I just think at this point, Patrick Mahomes just got hurt last year. He tore his ACL. Get him some more protection. And in what could possibly be the best tackle in the draft. And I mean, the first one off the board. So, might see a run on offensive line coming up here. But with that, Ryan, what do you got for this one?
This is who I picked when I had Kansas City for the main iteration of the draft. And like I said, I think it's a good fit. is a flexible piece. I talked about moving people around, but he's a guy that can be the 1-2 move that you insert him and then he plays there where he then becomes comfortable. And yeah, good value here. I think all the picks above him are good, but the fact that he slipped to 9, I think that's good value for Kansas City. And protecting Mahomes has got to be the priority. Yeah, they could use some weapons, but we've talked about the ability to maybe get those later. So you got to keep him upright because he just has not had as good of protection as he probably should as the franchise quarterback trying to be the GOAT that he is here.
Yeah, and just cutting Juwan Taylor obviously opened a pretty big hole there for them. And they did sign Jalen Moore, but I'm not too convinced in him. But James, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, I was just Googling Jawan Taylor's name because I'm like, I know they lost their right tackle in free agency / cut him, whatever. He's no longer there. And as you both mentioned, Mahomes is hurt. Even before he got hurt, he was running for his life every play. I know now they have Justin Fields over there, at least temporary. Obviously, he can run, but you don't want to just force him to run just because he can. And
Mhm.
as we've stated 1,000 times on the show over the last month and even years, it's never a bad thing to add trenches, ever. So, yeah, great
Yeah,
pick.
definitely agree there. I think that's kind of the theme of the show is trenches, baby.
Yeah.
And we should get T-shirts. Personally, I think some T-shirts that just say trenches, baby. That would be awesome. But with that, if you're watching and would love to gift us something, that would be sweet. No, with
Yeah.
that though, the Giants are now on the clock, and obviously we went Sonny Styles with our first round pick. This time around, I'm going to go Spencer Fano. Okay, and in my opinion, he's the best pure lineman in the draft. Obviously, I like Maui Noah a little bit more as a guard, but I think Fano offers a little bit more versatility. He can play tackle, he can play guard, he can play center. He also offers a little bit more of that athletic ability, whereas Maui Noah is more of just like a thick, sturdy power guard. And I think it makes a lot of sense for the Giants here to go a guy who can play all over the offensive line because they have a need at O line and they have need at a couple of positions. So it gives them a little bit, more versatility, plug and play. And I think Harbaugh, once again, is a guy who likes to build in the trenches and he wants to give his quarterback and his run game the best possible ability to do their job. So I think they go Fano here. Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
Yeah, I really like this move. When we did the mock draft, I had the Giants, but obviously we made that trade for 28 versus 10. Good value there for the Giants, and might as well take a guy that's kind of in a tier to himself along with Maui Noah, and insert him into that line because that line has been piecemeal for a long time and it's steadily improved, but this is probably the final piece to kind of lock everything into place, especially given the new coach and regime that they have there, like you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. James, what do you got on that one?
Yeah, you guys summed it up very well. Like as you mentioned, Fano can play anywhere on the line. I know at the combine he even did some center workouts, even though he hasn't played it in a game, at least to my knowledge. And with Harbaugh going over to the Giants, there were reports that he tried to take Linderbaum with him. Obviously, he ended up going to the Raiders. So clearly he values that center position. And I'm not saying he's going to play center. He's just capable of playing center. And as you mentioned, that versatility, you'll find somewhere to plug and play him on that line, day one starter. And not to beat the dead horse, but it's never bad to add trenches.
Yeah, for sure. Now the Dolphins are on the clock with pick 11. And this one we're going to stay true. Mansour Delane, I feel like that's one of the most mocked picks, along with a few others that we've mentioned. I just think it makes sense. Number one corner in the draft, probably the best player on the board, and it's a huge need. The Dolphins really don't have a single starting corner. In my opinion, not a good one, at least right now. So Delane steps in day one and is their number one corner. And I think he is a number one corner in the NFL. So definitely worth the number 11 pick here. James, what do you got to add for this one?
Nothing really. I'll keep it short and sweet to the point. Miami, in my opinion, has the worst roster in football after all of their trades between losing or cutting Tyreek Hill, trading Waddle, obviously getting rid of Tua. They need everything. So just sit tight and take best player available. It is what it is.
Exactly. Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet as well. I think the idea here makes sense as far as cornerback because, like you guys said, they have a ton of needs. Why put people in there that are going to get beat up and not and get mileage on them? You've got a cornerback that from day one can play his position, not really have to depend on the rest of the defense, and not be subject to, okay, I'm gonna take more punishment, or I'm gonna be worse as a result of the defense not really holding up. He'll still be on his island kind of thing. So I think it's a good way to rebuild and a good strategy because, yeah, if you're putting somebody in there that doesn't have the rest of the group, you're putting a lineman in there that doesn't have four other guys to work with. You're obviously got a quarterback, but what is he going to be working with? That's what I worry about there for him. He's not going to have a lot to work with, so that's a guy that you can eventually build around and a piece that you're filling in for hopefully for their sake for years to come.
Yeah, and I think it might be kind of crazy, but this is something to think about. Jermod McCoy is a guy who's been falling quite a bit in the last few days. If he's there at 30, I think the Dolphins might take him too. I mean, it might be crazy, but he could be the number one corner in this draft if he was healthy. And obviously, there's some concerns about him being able to play next year, but like we said, they have the worst roster in the league. So they're kind of quote unquote lucky in that way that they can just draft whoever is the best player on the board. Now the Cowboys are on the clock, and I am gonna do what is gonna look like a reach on this board, and I'm gonna take Keldrick Falk, the edge from Auburn, one of my personal favorite players in this draft. I also think the Cowboys are a big fan of his as well, and I think there is potential they take a tackle here. But in my opinion, I think a tackle will fall to them at 20 that they really like, and an edge will not be there outside of maybe Akeem Messidor. And I think the NFL as a whole likes Falk a little bit more than they do Messidor, and that has to do with the age, but a lot of other things too. I mean, Falk just has some physical gifts that Messidor doesn't have, and I think with what the Cowboys are trying to do right now and stopping the run. That's been their big key this year or this last year, building their team. I think adding a guy like Falk to that defensive line makes it just nasty. Obviously, getting Quinnen Williams and Rashawn Gary via trade last offseason definitely helps that as well. So, Ryan, what do you got to add for this one?
Yeah, I think this is a guy that obviously he's rising up the board, but I feel like he was a little undervalued going into the process, and now I think he's kind of getting properly valued. Obviously, he's a name that has been tied to the Lions, but I feel like initially you saw him in some mock drafts at 50 to the Lions, and it's like, okay, I don't think, yeah, that'd be a nice scenario. I wouldn't have a problem with that as somebody that covers the Lions, but the idea of him going to the Cowboys seems like a very good fit there, and I agree on the on the other positions. It's again that same equation of what you can get now versus what you can get later.
Yeah, definitely. James, what do you got on this one?
I think it was the latest mock when I had the Cowboys. I took Falk here, so I agree with the pick. They're obviously valuing their trenches, as you mentioned, trading for Quentin Williams and signing Rashawn Gary or trading for Rashawn Gary, and I wouldn't be completely shocked if he's still available, if they still go Mesidor with their next pick, because I know they have another first round here, and obviously even if they both pan out, like obviously you can make a rotational thing with Gary, keep them all fresh. We've talked about rotating on the line before, and if one of them doesn't pan out, because I mean obviously you never know hindsight, then you just kind of double your chances at finding that guy for the future.
Yeah, and now the Rams are on the clock, and I think this is where things get a little wild. Okay, Makai Lemon has been the guy that a lot of analysts are mocking here. I'm gonna go with a different wide receiver. I'm gonna go with Jordan Tyson. Simply because he is the best receiver in this draft in terms of pure talent. Obviously, he's got some injury issues. There have been some character questions in terms of like how much he really wants it. However, the Rams are going all for it this year, and I do think that they trade Devonte Adams. At least they're really trying to. So I think Jordan Tyson not only would replace Devonte Adams, he would fit perfectly with those other two receivers in Adams and Nakua, and then you have a guy for the future as well. And who knows what's going to happen with Puka Nakua because he's got his own stuff going on right now. So I think Tyson makes a lot of sense. And I think this is like probably outside of 8, I think this is probably best case scenario for Tyson. I could see 11. But I don't know if the Dolphins GM would take that risk. So Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with, talking about Adams and Nakua. On paper, if you look at that team right now, you'd go, wait a minute, you're taking a third receiver, but this is a sneaky need for them, for a team that is trying to stay in their window with Stafford's time dwindling, we think. I don't know. We thought it was dwindling a while ago, so we think it's dwindling at some point. But yeah, the board, the way it's going right now, it was like there was a lot of players that seemed like a good fit. Now we're kind of getting to the point where some of these guys I personally would fade a little bit. You talked about McCoy and the injury issues. Yeah, Lemon, I would favor taking a receiver later over him and taking a chance on that. Freeling, I'm not as high on as some of the other tackles. And obviously tight ends, a specific need for people. So that leaves James's guy. So I'll kick it over to him. But that's the only other guy left that's kind of like, okay, when is he coming off the board? Which I bet it's going to be soon.
17.
A little bit sooner than that, unfortunately, James. I feel like you can kind of bet your house on Ioane going to the Ravens. But with that, James, what do you got to add on Tyson to the Rams?
I like him over Lemon because of the needs you said. Just because Tyson's an outside receiver, and I think Lemon's kind of locked into the slot. And while they could use a slot receiver if everyone on paper was healthy, and I'll just say playing on Sunday because obviously they're dealing with their own situations. But with them potentially trading Adams, with them, who knows what's going on with Puka Nakua in terms of his availability. Tyson is, as you mentioned, the best receiver in the draft. So just go ahead and get your guy. And even if they don't end up trading Devonte Adams, he's obviously starting to get a little long in the tooth. So this is a kind of a contingency plan at worst.
Yeah, for sure. With that, the Ravens are now on the clock, and I'm going to do something absolutely insane. I'm going to take Sawyer. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
I'm going to
exactly.
go with I'm going to go with Ioane here, the guard
Reach.
from Penn State. Who could have saw that coming? No, but with that though, I think this is the most obvious pick in the entire draft if he makes it there because they have a huge need at right guard, and he's the best player there. So they go ahead and pick up Ioane, and that's really, there's not too much else to say. He's one of the best players in the draft. Obviously, a little undervalued because he's an interior lineman, but getting him at pick 14 is pretty solid here. James, the floor is yours.
I'll keep it short and sweet because I mean everyone who watches the program and that would be watching now knows I love the guy. I feel like he is legitimately a top like 3 to 4 talent in the entire draft. I just think he is falling because, as Jay said, he's an interior lineman. I think if he was a tackle, he would go probably number 3. But guards tend to be a little undervalued. I haven't seen a guard drafted that high since I'm spacing on the Colts
Quentin
guy.
Nelson.
Quentin Nelson, thank you. I'm like the Colts
I
guy from
just
Notre
watched that
Dame.
draft yesterday. That's how I remembered.
But that was what, 5 overall?
6, I think. Yeah.
6? Okay. I'm like, I remember he went to Notre Dame and he got drafted by the Colts. But yeah, Quentin Nelson, and he's been a beast. And yeah,
Dude, he was.
I just
This is sorry to
no
get
go.
in there on you, but Quentin Nelson is the only lineman in NFL history to have his own highlight reel posted by the NFL. So just gonna say that there, he's been
Yeah,
one of the best in the NFL. Period.
yeah. I feel like he can have, and I know some people are gonna roll their eyes, but it's how I feel, so it is what it is. I feel like he can have like a Penei Sewell type impact. I feel like he is a game changer. You can run behind him, especially if we move Sewell over, if assuming he goes to Lions in my mock head. Um, we can put him next to Sewell at the left side. You can just run Gibbs all day. He's also a stonewall in the pass game. He did not allow a sack last year. He's literally everything you want in a guard, and I totally get him not going to 17, but it just really sucks because I haven't been this high on a guard in a little bit, even though I did really like Booker last year, who ended up going to Dallas.
Definitely. Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
Guys like this are a force multiplier. I view this in the way that I viewed the Lions offensive line when they had a healthy Ragnow and Decker, and then anybody they put in between him that ended up kind of looking better. I think Ione is going to be kind of the reverse of that, where he's going to make everybody else better around him. And another position, yeah, you could put in Maui Noah or guys that may play guard, Proctor, guys like that. But as far as pure guard, another big drop off between the top one and the second one as far as pure guard. So like you said, team and need and player, kind of a supreme fit there.
Definitely. With that, the Buccaneers are now on the clock, and this was probably the hardest pick I've had so far, just because it's like there's so many ways that you could go. But I'm gonna go with Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Oregon, and the reason why is I think he projects as a true free safety, a rangy, cover the middle of the field type of guy. They have Tyke Smith, who is more of a nickel, and then they have oh my gosh, I'm blanking on their
It's
other
Winfield,
safeties
isn't
there.
it?
Yes, Antoine Winfield. He is more of like an all-around safety, but you kind of like him in the box a little bit more than you do like your rangy free safety. So I think you get Thieneman. You can move Smith back to the nickel where he belongs. You have your two best corners on the outside, and then you have your defensive backfield is pretty set. So there was a couple ways you could have went. But I decided safety made the most sense for them here, just because I do think he was one of the best players on the board as well, and he fits a need. With that, Ryan, what do you got to add for this one?
I like the way that you explained that. I think this is an underrated concept in team building, where if you have guys that they may be good at their position, but you can maximize them and put a guy in that is maybe an upgrade at that position that he takes over, then you're basically having a compound effect where you're improving three positions by inserting one player. And there are different, I think the Lions even have something like this that they can do. So there's teams that have players that, hey, they're doing what they can in the position that they're in, but if you can put them in their ideal position, I think this is a good way to do it. And I had the Bucks in here, and yeah, this is kind of a middle ground where it's a little bit wide open for them. So might as well improve that secondary that kind of overperformed last year with the talent. Now you've got some true talent at the back end, especially.
Definitely. James, what do you got to add on this one?
I like it. There's a chance I can potentially see them going corner since they lost Jamal Dean in free agency, but putting in that kind of center fielder type of safety is kind of a catch-all that will help out both sides and give the corners that they do have more assistance.
And honestly, like the only reason, well, not the only reason, there's two reasons I didn't go corner. The number one is McCoy's issues, injury wise, but also I feel pretty good about the Buccaneers corners, and I think they do as well. You've got Parrish there, who's pretty young, who with this move would be the guy on the bench. So they're decently deep there, and I think that's kind of why they let Dean walk. They have a few younger guys that can kind of step up for him. But with that, the Jets are now on the clock, and I'll tell you, they are pissed that the Rams took Jordan Tyson a few picks before, because that's who they were hoping would fall to them, considering all the medical stuff and everything like that. So they're going to go with the next best receiver option, which is Makai Lemon. Ryan, you mentioned you're a little bit lower on him than others, and I'm kind of right there with you. I like him. I don't love him. However, I really like the fit with New York. I also think this is just kind of where they go. They want to get as much help for their 2027 quarterback as possible. And Makai Lemon fits perfectly next to Wilson because, like we mentioned, he is more of a slot guy. And I think that's what, in my opinion, And not to go off on a tangent, but when you get a young quarterback, I think the best way to help him out, it's not an X receiver. Everybody seems to think, go get your quarterback a big X receiver and he'll be great. Well, you guys kind of remember that's the guy who's demanding the number one corner. That's the guy, I mean, you're throwing outside back shoulder balls. Those are not easy balls to throw. You know what I mean? Get him a slot. Get him a guy like Amon Ra. Get him a guy who he can throw the ball to after he runs 6 yard out every play if that's what they want to do. So I think that's kind of what Lemon brings to the Jets, and I think that's why it makes a lot of sense for them. So, James, what do you got to add on this one?
Yeah, I agree. I have heard the adage for a young quarterback, their best friend can also be a tight end, but
Hmm.
I'd say the slot receiver would be the next best thing. It's as you mentioned, kind of the more shifty type of receiver, and as I mentioned when we were talking about Tyson, Lemon, I don't feel like is too big of a drop off talent wise. I just think he is locked into that slot. So I feel for some teams he might be higher on the board than Tyson just because of need. But I can absolutely see the Jets making this pick here and using him day one, year one.
For sure. Ryan, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, you mentioned me saying that I wasn't as high on him. I do think this is a good fit for the Jets. I think it's going to give Aaron Glenn, and Ross St. Brown vibes, a shifty slot type receiver out of USC. I'm not comparing them, but I do think that Glenn's going to kind of look at it that way. The other thing I wanted to piggyback off your comment because I thought it was great about the slot receiver. I think that's the right way to think about it. The other thing with saying an X is your best friend, yeah, let's put the young quarterback back there for as long as we possibly can. Let's wait for the route to develop to 50 yards and make him sit back there and hoist it. And let's hope our line holds up and he doesn't get killed in the process.
Yeah, and that's exactly to, James's point with the tight ends. That's exactly why they love tight ends too, because the tight ends are getting open in 3 yards because that's their job. And I think obviously a tight end or a slot receiver are interchangeable in the way that they can be a
Yep.
quarterback's best friend. The same way a good run game is his best friend as well. So with that, without further ado, the Detroit Lions are now on the clock. And as always, we're going to take a little bit more time here with this pick. Now, number one thing, there have been a lot of rumors about a trade up, okay? And I've expressed my opinions about this trade up many times on Twitter. Peter Schrager, look, man, I like you as an analyst, but I'm not going to lie, your mock drafts are not great. Like, they're usually very far off. And I'm hoping it's the same way with this one because he has the Lions trading up to 13 with the Rams to select tackle Caden Proctor from Alabama. I hate it for many reasons. Okay, I hate it simply because it's stupid. Why are you trading up for a guy who's going to be there at 17? I mean, if we go ahead and look at the mock draft, hey guys, do you see a single tackle taken from 11 to 16? Because I don't. And I think that's kind of what's going to happen come draft day. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about, teams trying to trade up over the Lions to get a tackle. They might, and that's fine because there's like six of them that I think the Lions would be okay with. There's two specifically, well, three. We got Freeling, we got Miller, and we got Proctor that I think the Lions really like, and they'd be fine with any of those three. Now, with that said, the trade was just stupid because we gave up a second round pick and a fourth round pick, and our second round pick was next year in a better class. I just personally felt personally scorned by that decision there. And if Brad Holmes does that, I'm not going to be very happy at all. And I like Caden Proctor more than most, so it's really the value for me. It just made no sense.
I don't even like Proctor, so I hated the trade on all fronts. But just this 20 seconds ago, if we do trade ahead of the Rams or a trade ahead of the Baltimore Ravens for a lineman, I have an idea.
Well, I would hate that too, unfortunately.
I actually would too. As much as I love him, we cannot trade up in this draft.
No.
We have
It-
a few holes, and like you said, next year's draft class is better, so I don't want to use future picks. We only have 2 picks in the top 100 for this year. So as much as I do love Vega, I would not trade up for him.
No, and you know, there are other teams that it makes a ton of sense to trade up, like the Steelers, and I think that might be a team that's trying to trade up ahead of the Lions to get a tackle. And if that's what they want to do, let them. They got a shit ton of picks over there. I know because I was the Steelers GM, and they have like 6 top 100 picks. I was like, dude, where are these coming from? But either way, with that being said, I do feel like the Lions do like Caden Proctor, and I've been saying that for a long time on this show, as we all know, and that's why I have them taking him here at 17. Now, is this what I would do? Maybe not, just because I do like Proctor, but there's a few other tackles available. Personally, I would try to trade down, but you have to have somebody wanting to trade up to do that. But I really do think Brad Holmes loves Proctor. I don't think he loves him enough to trade up. However, I think he loves him enough to take him at 17, which, like we've mentioned on the show many times, this time last year he was a top 5 pick in this draft class. So I don't think it's that crazy to take him here. But with that, Ryan, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think this is maybe our biggest point of kind of divergence in the draft between the two of us specifically, because I said this on my show when we were doing the interview, but I we've been seeing a lot of Proctor on the national media side of things, including Schrager, who kind of was one of the ones to start it and then now has them trading up for him. I think the deficit between what we're hearing on the national circuit versus the local circuit is telling us something. And we're hearing Caden Proctor a ton on the national circuit and not nearly as much on the local circuit, and hearing a lot of Blake Miller with some Monroe Freeling mixed in. So I would defer to you, Jace, certainly on his ability to play line and because your analysis would be much more poignant than mine on that. But the way I look at him is I almost look at him as like the opposite of what the Lions go for typically, as far as the size, the athleticism. Those are great traits. He also, for how big he is and how much athleticism he has, he doesn't seem like he's got great movement on the pulling side of things, which they do a decent amount. There is some questions whether or not he would have to kick in to guard initially. So there's that. So to me, I think Miller is it's like he was created for them. All that being said, I would not be surprised at all if they make this pick, but that deficit is just sticking out to me like a sore thumb of national versus local, because I talked to both and I talked to almost everybody on the beat, and it's crazy how kind of unanimous it is. So this will be the most interesting part of the draft to me. Obviously the Lions pick in general, but just what they do here, because somebody's right about it and somebody's not, as far as whoever's got that story. But it'll be interesting. But obviously both very good talents. Proctor's a great talent. I think when I talk about him, it then sounds like I don't like him. It's not that. I just don't necessarily see him being the pick for the Lions over somebody like Miller, because Miller, they have him trading down for. If you think of it like the Terrion Arnold trade, where they traded up to get Arnold, it's almost like if they were down in the 25-ish range again, 25 to 30. Miller seems like the type of guy that they would trade up for, even though he may still be there in the range that they were at. So now the roles are kind of reversed, but it's an interesting juxtaposition for sure. But yeah, Proctor's got a ton of talent, and yeah, we'll see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah, and honestly, like the big thing, like personally, the biggest thing that I think stops the Lions from drafting Proctor is what you said earlier with they're not sure if he's going to play guard or tackle in the NFL. And also the fact that the Lions want to move Sewell to left. And I mean, Proctor and Miller both play left. So it's one of those things that, like, okay, I guess we'll kind of see if that's what they want to do. But again, we'll see what happens, obviously, come the night of the draft. But I just went this way simply because I'm totally with you. I would rather have Miller at this point for all the reasons you mentioned. But James, what do you got to add for this one?
I definitely can see this being the pick just because they met with him at the pro day at the combine. They've done so much research. There, they're being linked on the national media because of how much attention they've given him. Hopefully, it's a smokescreen because I'm not that big on him. I don't think he's terrible or anything, but in with who is on the board still for this mock, I have him as my tackle three. I like Freeling and Miller better personally. Um, but with, as you mentioned, them wanting Sewell to potentially move over to left tackle because Miller's played right tackle at Clemson, I feel like that's the match made in heaven. Not only does he have all that grit, we mentioned how he only missed one practice and all that, but Freeling played left tackle, Proctor played left tackle, so it's not completely unheard of to switch positions just like we switch Sewell positions. But if you don't have to, and I like Miller a little more anyways, I would just go with Miller here. But I totally understand being a predictive mock why the pick is Proctor here.
Yeah, and I misspoke. I did say Miller played left tackle. I meant Freeling played left tackle, and that's
I
why I
thought
think
you
it makes
misspoke,
more
but I'm like,
sense. Yeah, that's why it makes more sense for us to take Miller over those two guys. So, but with that, the last thing I will say here is I am a lot lower on Freeling than most, man. I watching his film, I just don't think he's very good. Like I just don't at all. Like his hands are bad, his feet are bad. Like do I think he's got some athletic talent and it might be worth a back end of the first round pick? Sure. But just from what I saw on film, I'm taking Proctor over him for sure. But, that's just
well,
me.
watch
So,
us go Kenyon Sadiq here if Laporta's back's all messed up, and we'll just keep adding to the offense that way.
yeah, right. We'll have Laporta add 60 pounds and play him at right tackle. Well, we can actually do some cool trick plays with that, though. No, but with that,
Watch this.
the Laporta is eligible. No, but the Vikings are now on the clock at pick 18, and this might be a surprise for some. Okay, I'm gonna stop the Jamad McCoy slide right here. Okay, not only is he probably the most talented corner on this in this draft class, the Vikings have a huge need at corner, specifically outside corner, number one corner. And if he doesn't play next year, yeah, that sucks. But you're getting a guy that probably would have went top 10 here at 18. And I think this is kind of like looking back at what the Lions did with Jamison Williams. Obviously, making that trade up didn't look too smart after his rookie season, but I think after the last 2 years, everybody can kind of agree that it was probably a good move by the Lions. So the Vikings go Jermod McCoy here and stop his slide. Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
Yeah, I think it's good value for him here. The one of the concepts in sports in general, but in the NFL that I typically tend to like is if I could see them almost pairing this with a cornerback later. Obviously, we're not doing a mock draft beyond the first round today, but if we did their draft later, I could see them getting a young guy that may be able to fill in for him in the meantime, or somebody on the roster. Then you're getting them the experience. Then McCoy comes in, and you're getting kind of a force multiplier there, where you're getting some experience for a guy that wouldn't have gotten it otherwise. You've improved him and made him stronger in a backup role. And then you've got McCoy in there to kind of lock it down, because we've talked about this with some of the positions that have been taken for some of the teams. But I think you mentioned it, Jace, in a previous iteration of the mock draft, but this is a position that's been consistently weakening for the Vikings, so they need to solidify it here, as we've been seeing and okay with as Lions fans. But if you're the Vikings, you want to solidify it.
Yeah, for sure. James, what do you got for this one?
I like it a lot, and I think actually the kind of a JMO comparison is perfect because, as you mentioned, he might have a redshirt year. Maybe like JMO just come in and play the final like back 6 games on a snap count. But if you are Minnesota, are you going to potentially take away a number one corner for the next 10 years because you don't want him to sit out a potential half a season? Like, I understand why come October and November, you might be a little upset that this was the pick, but literally after the first couple months, you'll be good from then on. So I do like the pick, and I have no problem because I don't think Minnesota is a Super Bowl ready team this year. So go ahead and take someone who can help you and be a potential blue chip corner for the next decade.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the Vikings are a little bit farther away from winning right now than most people would think. So I think that that makes even more sense with having to figure out McCarthy. You just got rid of a lot of guys on your defense. Now the Panthers are on the clock, and we're going to go Kenyon Sadiq here. Just, give Bryce Young or Bryce Love, whichever one, a a new weapon here. And obviously, Sadiq is the number one tight end in the draft, and that's why he's the only tight end that goes in the first round in most, probably all mock drafts. And I think getting him here at 19 is good value. Obviously, he doesn't have the production you would necessarily want out of a first round tight end, but he has all the athletic traits and all the abilities. So, and obviously, I think the Panthers have just had really poor tight end groups for the last 10 years. Really, since they got rid of Greg Olson, they have not had good tight ends over there. So, get Young another weapon in Sadiq. James, what do you got for this one?
Sorry, I had to unmute before I talked because I was on another tab. So you didn't get me this time. But I remember I had to look it up because I knew he ran a 4.3940, but I remember they said in terms of the miles per hour that he reached, he hit the same top speed as Gibbs did on his. So if you can get a man significantly bigger, he's got great hands, he's got great film. Like you mentioned, the production numbers weren't there, but could that be? And I'm not going to lie and say I watched a ton of Oregon football. Did they not feature him? Because I feel like if you feature him, he could be an absolute star, just like Brock Bowers right out the gate. And if you can have a tight end with that size and speed and athleticism, I joked about him going to the Lions, but like if you were building just a Madden mode, I wouldn't hate it. um, if you just want to say, F defense and try to win 45-42 like the old school Saints, why not? But for Carolina, I think he's the perfect pick. I think this is a pretty common pick. And as we mentioned a few times, like either a slot receiver or a good tight end can be your young quarterback's best friend.
Yeah, for sure. Ryan, what do you got on this one?
I had Carolina in our mock draft, and I think the first time I ended up taking Sadiq, and then the next time he wasn't there. But tight end is a clear need for them, and I know they've got some receiver issues as well, but that's not really a great value here. I'm with you, Jace. I'm sure we'll have this conversation at some point since he's sitting at 13, but Freeling doesn't really do it for me entirely as far as an option for them here. So I think this is good value, and yeah, solidifies this position for a long time, because much like we're talking about as far as the comparison like Harris to Downs, this is a huge improvement for them at tight end, and really gives Bryce Love / Young Young a great option.
Yeah, definitely. With that, the Cowboys are now on the clock, and I'm not going to waste too much time. We're going Monroe Freeling here. Like we just talked about, I don't love him that much, but he has a lot of athletic traits, and the Cowboys really need a tackle, period. Guyton has not become, what they hoped. Oh my gosh, I keep spacing on their right tackle's name, even though I
Steele.
traded for him. Yeah, Terrence Steele. I don't know how. Literally every time in our other mock, I would try to bring him up. I would always forget. But Terrence Steele is decent at right tackle, but Freeling obviously playing left tackle. I do think that gives them a little bit more movement on that offensive line. And obviously, if Guyton doesn't pan out, now you've got Freeling, and you might be able to move Guyton inside or over to right and kind of see where things go from there. So, James, what do you got on this one?
I like Freeling more than you two do, and I mean that's fine. It makes me, to be honest, because I know you both know ball, especially Jason, in terms of the trenches. Makes me a little apprehensive about what I feel because I do think he's better than what you guys are saying. But I mean, time will tell. And in one of the mocks we did, having Dallas, I did take Freeling here. So to me, it makes perfect sense. Um, I do think it was funny just earlier when I mentioned potentially still going Mesidor here, and he's down the board. I'm just like, that would be funny. But they do need a tackle, as you mentioned, and I can. Um, I don't know why he said it, to be honest, but I did see a remark by Freeling saying he's willing to move inside, but I do think he's best fit at tackle personally. But as I mentioned before, with Jace kind of being the offensive line expert, it does make me a little bit more tentative. Like, what am I not seeing? Um, but yeah, so what's on the board, what their needs are, I think it's a good fit.
Yeah. Ryan, what do you got on that one?
Yeah, I like the fit here. Obviously, like you guys were saying, Jason and I are kind of in the same category on Freeling. I will defer the analysis part to Jace because he's better at that than I am. But I look at I look at these tackles. We talked about the three, and James was saying about Proctor being his third between Miller, Freeling, and Proctor. Freeling's the third for me, and there's a pretty big deficit between Miller and then Proctor and Freeling, and kind of there's some spacing there. I would almost put Freeling in that second tier of tackles, and it's sometimes to some degree it's the amount of experience. I feel like we've got a small sample size with him, got a big sample size with Miller, got a decent sample size with Proctor. Yes, he's got some good traits, but Proctor's got better size. He's got decent traits. Miller, maybe bringing up the rear in that particular category, but still has good traits. So it's when you compare him against all these other guys, I just would put him down a tier. That doesn't mean he's not going to be a competent, successful NFL player. It just means that I probably, if I had to grade him, I don't think if I were managing most of these teams, I don't know that I'd have a first round grade. I think I'd take a chance on a guy that say like I'm going to pull a name out, somebody like Austin Barber, who's way down. He's maybe in that third tier of tackles. I'd rather spend that value on somebody like him than a first round value on Freeling. But like I said, I feel more confident in that whole thing because Jace has analyzed them and agreed with me from the offensive line standpoint. But there were a bunch of things that made me nervous, just kind of the on paper part, because I'll be honest in the fact that I can't analyze offensive line play the way that both of these guys can.
Quick question
Well,
for you. I'm curious where you have Freeling as opposed to like a Lomu.
Are you asking me or
Yes.
Jace?
No,
So
both of you,
yeah,
but
that's an interesting one. Yeah, Lomu is another one that I could see being a little bit varied as far as his value too. I do like the flexibility with him and the ability to play multiple positions. You've seen more from him. So I would put Lomu above him, but that's not my top tier either. But I would put Lomu above him personally.
Yeah, I would have Lomu above him, but just a little bit because I do think they have similar issues. Like Lomu is a left tackle, and is very raw and all those things, has athletic traits. But I think the way I kind of look at stuff is, what were we saying pre-combine? Lomu was the number one tackle on the board, and Freeling was maybe getting picked at 28, 29. And then the combine happened, and out of nowhere, we see Freeling getting mocked at 6. I personally believe that's a media thing. I don't think the NFL believes that, which is part of the reason why I have him going here at 20. Which, speaking of Lomu, we can just use that as a perfect segue. That's who goes next in this mock draft to the Steelers.
I did not look at that.
Great segue, James.
I did not look at that.
Which, with that being said, I do think the Steelers may have preferred Freeling. Not for sure about that, but I think they're happy with Lomu. I do think Lomu needs a little bit more work, but I do think he has a little bit more flashes on film of high level play. I do think Lomu is a guy that the Steelers feel pretty good about, but they're not necessarily wanting to trot him out week one. They still have oh my gosh, I'm spacing on their current left tackle's name somehow, but he Broderick Jones, I believe.
Jones, there you go.
Broderick Jones, okay. But yeah, so he is a decent player, but nothing great, and I think they're going to want to replace him, so that's why they go Lomu here. James, what do you got to add on this one?
I do like Lomu. Lomu was mocked to the Lions in most of the early mocks. So he's someone I kind of put a lot of resources in, at least watching him early. I haven't watched a lot of tape on him recently. I kind of feel like I did enough work a month ago, and obviously no games have been played since. But he's a guy I do like if at least from a Lions aspect, if we were keeping Sewell off to the right, because I do think he's I don't want to say just a left tackle, but I don't think he has as much versatility as some others do, which is fine. I'm not a O-line guru, but um, I like him for the Steelers. I like him at this spot, and other than maybe Miller, I do think he is the best lineman or at least tackle available.
Yeah, and a big reason why I like Lomu going to the Steelers is because his pass protection is where he that's his bread and butter. He has
Yeah.
issues in run blocking, but if the Steelers are bringing back Rodgers, they really need a guy at left tackle that can kind of help that pass protection out. So, Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Lomu in the transition, but I do think he's a talented guy. There's a couple things that stick out to me with the fact that the Steelers need to allocate more resources to their offensive line. They've spent a lot of high picks and money on the offensive line, but arguably it is still a pretty decent need for them. A team that has a lot of picks. While you guys were talking about that, I wanted to bring this up because my opinions tend to match up with, I don't know if you guys follow the grit index a ton or saw the article that came out about the tackles that they're interested in, but it's just kind of funny because the ones that we're talking about in this range, Proctor, Freeling, and Lomu are the lowest on the grit index, and then Miller and Fano and Ianakor are kind of at the top there. So it's kind of interesting. I think I tend to align there, knowing that that's something that the Lions value. But we're talking about the Steelers here. But yeah, Lomu, the positional flexibility and the fact that they do need to solidify that offensive line. They have some good players, but they need to make it a unit, especially really not knowing who's standing behind them, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, definitely. Now with that, the Chargers are on the clock, and I won't take too much time. I'm going to take the best player on the board, Peter Woods. I know in our mock draft he went a little bit later than this, but I do think the NFL still likes Peter Woods a little bit more than the draft community does. And that's one thing I will say, like, I used to be a guy who really got sucked into the Twitter draft sphere or whatever you want to call it. And look, a lot of the times they're just BSing. I'm not gonna lie. I think a lot of these guys just get bored and they just go, "Oh, I don't like Peter Woods anymore for whatever reason. I don't know. The film didn't change, the testing didn't change, but for some reason now we don't like him." Which just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I have him going at 22 here to the Chargers, and I think that's good value for them. Obviously, they need some D-line help, specifically on the interior that they've needed for a long time. So some people might go interior O-line here, but in terms of value, I think Woods is the better pick. With that, Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
What you said makes me think of aggregation. I talk about this a lot with the draft experts that come on the show because a lot of the individual people are not watching the tape as much as you'd think. They're seeing how the players are moving in other drafts, and they're saying, "Oh, well, I guess maybe I had him a little overvalued, or I guess I should move him down a little bit." And that happens way more than we give anybody credit for. So that's why it's good that you're listening to this podcast and you listen to Jason James, because they are watching film, they are going through things, because that makes a huge difference. It doesn't make one person right over another, but it makes them more informed, which is the key.
Yeah, exactly. Great point there, Ryan. Being informed is really what all you can do at this point. It's a guessing game for everybody. So, I got into a conversation with someone earlier today, like, well, you think you know more than NFL teams? They've spent hours and years and blah, blah. And it's like, no, I don't think that. However, I think the NFL has been wrong a lot of times before, and they have way more info than we do. However, with that, James, what do you got to add on this one?
I can't tell you how many times someone mentions or messages me and says, "Oh, you think you know more than?" I'm like, well, to be fair, I sometimes yes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm always right because I am not. Um, but there's certain players in years past that I wouldn't touch, like Trey Lance and stuff, and it would have worked out for me more so than the 49ers. But anyways, um, Peter Woods is a hell of a player. I had the Chargers and I liked going O-line with them, but obviously, as we mentioned, trenches, trenches, trenches. There's nothing wrong with Peter Woods. in the event of a trade back by the Lions, if there's a run on tackles like we had Lomu and Freeling go after that, I could see potentially the Lions taking him if we trade back into this area. Um, so I like this pick for the Chargers. I know they just obviously lost Bosa. I know he's an edge, but still adding to the defensive line, so that way whoever they do have at edge now has to work at least a little less hard to replace Bosa.
Yeah, for sure. And now we have the Eagles on the clock, and I'm not going to take too much time here. It's going to be Blake Miller, and for obvious reasons, Logan Johnson or Lane Johnson. I don't know why I said Logan. Lane Johnson is getting way too old to keep playing football. He probably is on his last year or two, and I think Miller, he might not start right away, but I think he is a steady, good option for them. And I honestly like. I don't think it would be insane to play him at guard to start his career, just to get him on the field. But either way, the Eagles have the ability here to take a player who might not start right away because they are so loaded. So, James, what do you got to add on this one?
Making sure I'm not muted. Yeah, Logan Johnson's probably one of the best protectors for Bryce Love. So
Yeah, very true.
as Ryan just said, watch these guys. They watch film and they know their shit. We do, but we kind of cross the names a little bit.
Mess us up for some reason.
We look at a lot of players, so yeah, they do get a little messed up here. But no, this pick makes me mad just because I hate Philly, and Blake Miller's a great guy, as we've mentioned, for the Lions, and just whoever gets him, I think he's going to be a hell of a player. So Philly has a knack for never having like a top pick, but always having the perfect guy kind of fall to them. And what a contingency plan for having your Hall of Fame right tackle eventually, sooner probably rather than later, right off into the sunset, and then you replace him with, in my opinion, the best right tackle, at least pure right tackle in this draft.
Yeah, for sure. Ryan, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, obviously we've covered Miller a lot already. This is interesting because in our mock draft, these two picks were reversed. Miller went to the Lions and Proctor went to the Eagles. I would be much happier with that scenario as a supporter of the Lions. But yeah, if I'm the Eagles, I'm very happy here. I know on most of the draft boards, we're on a different one here with the FanSpeak draft, but most of the draft boards I've seen, Miller is kind of where he's valued here. I value him higher, and we've covered the ranking part of it, but yeah, this would be a home run, and what a transition being able to learn under under Johnson and that offensive line as a whole, and then take off from there and work with the rest of the unit that's already working pretty well for itself. So this is probably one of my favorite picks of the draft so far. As far as if I'm the Eagles, which I was the GM of them, they really don't have as many needs. I know Lions fans aren't going to like me saying that, but when I looked at their team, it's like, man, this roster's already in pretty good shape. So that you can't go wrong with a pick like this that now is going to solidify that position for the next decade or so.
Yeah, unfortunately, if this were to happen, once again, Howie Roseman out GM'd Brad Holmes. That might be a hot take, and a lot of people might be upset when I say that, but look at the trades that we've made with the Eagles. We always lose. Look, like James said, at the players that fall to them. They always somehow get super lucky. So the Lions have had some luck as well with guys like Aiden Hutchinson and Penei Sewell, but not quite as much as the Eagles. Now, with that, the Browns are now on the clock, and I'm going to do something that doesn't happen a lot. I'm going to take Denzel Boston here at 24, simply because I love Denzel Boston. I think the NFL is a little bit higher on Denzel Boston than the draft community. And I think he is the best receiver available. And, like we talked about before, which really cool thing about FanSpeak, not to get too much into it, but they show you your upcoming picks, your selected players, all that. So I can scroll back here and look, we got Ruben Bain with our first round pick. So I think Denzel Boston is a perfect receiver for the Browns here. And I personally really like the value. I know most people probably have him going a couple picks later, but I'm not going to split hairs with that. So that's why we went Boston. Ryan, what do you got to add on this one?
Well, this is interesting the way you did this. I swear I didn't know this before, but we were talking about the deficit, picking Bain at 6 there, and you're getting a better value if you take Bain and then a receiver later versus Tate and then an edge. And now we have a perfect example here because you're either getting Bain in Boston or Tate and Mesidor. So I like Mesidor. I know he's got the age thing, and I think he's a good player, but I'm taking Bain and Boston as the pairing for sure because I think Boston is kind of I think he's a little underrated as well. I'm higher on him than some, and I think he's a good insertion into a team that needs a lot of weapons. But yeah, that's interesting how that played out because yeah, I'm definitely taking that pairing over the pairing that you could have gotten, and nobody would have really complained too much. I don't think.
Yeah, and I definitely agree on you there. The tier drop that you get from Bane to Messidor is way bigger than you get from Tate to Boston, in my opinion. So, James, what do you got for this one?
Nothing. Ryan took the words out of my mouth. I was gonna make a Bane and Boston versus Tate and Mesidor comparison, but he already did. So
Well, that's one cool thing about having like minds here. Me and James and Ryan don't disagree very often, and I know sometimes that might be a little boring, but hey, when you know ball, you seem to agree with each other. So obviously, there's always different ways to do things, and we might not always agree on the player necessarily, but we always understand the thought process. So with that. The Bears are now on the clock, and we are going to go with another super, super obvious pick here, Caden McDonald from Ohio State. Obviously, they need some, defensive line help, period. It's one of their biggest needs, and I think McDonald's the best one on the board right now. So not really too much to say about that other than you match a good player with a need. So, James, what do you got on this one?
yeah, I do think there's a little more debate than some people with in terms of McDonald's versus Banks. I'm a slightly higher on Banks than McDonald, just for Banks's. I think he has a more added pass rush ability than McDonald does. However, Banks has a little bit of an injury history that you also have taken into consideration. So, like, tit for tat, and it can just be preference. But I have no problem with McDonald. Well, I do because he's a bear, but I have no problem with McDonald. He's a heck of a player, and he will, I feel, be very solid at the next level.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, 2 quick points. I mean, we talked a lot about the 3 Ohio State players in the top 10. This guy was a big factor on their defense, and I think was a force multiplier for a lot of the other guys that have already been taken here, especially when you're talking about linebacker level and defensive tackle. We've talked about that a decent amount. The other thing is this is my first time in fan speak, so I haven't really gone around, but it was interesting to me that you had to click the defensive line button and find him because he's not rated that high. James already talked about the comparison between him and Banks. I think the injury thing sticks out big time for me with Banks. But then I noticed that board for defensive tackle is a lot different, seemingly early on than what we were dealing with stick to the model. So that'll be interesting to watch as we go. But like you guys have been saying, that's why we have these different things. There's a lot of difference in the valuation of the players and evaluation. So, but yeah, I think that's a pretty solid pick and would solidify the Bears defensive line. And as James said, and has referred to a lot, if I'm the Lions, I don't want to play against him. That's a move that I'm going, that's a good piece.
Yeah, I basically think Caden McDonald is this year's Tyleek Williams in that way. Just a pure run stopper. Probably isn't going to be a great pass rusher, but the Caleb Banks foot stuff. And I will say, how do I say this? Banks' size kind of hurts him as a pass rusher in a weird way. He's 6'6", like 330 or whatever it was. his like height and length kind of hurts him as a pass rusher on the interior. So that is a little bit of another reason why I didn't go him there. But with the Bills, we're going to go Akeem Mesidor, a guy we've talked about a little bit here. An older prospect, obviously, but the Bills are an older team and they need to win now. So they go an edge rusher, and I think that just makes a ton of sense. I think Akeem Mesidor would be drafted higher if he wasn't so old. So I think they're getting a good value pick here at 26. So Ryan, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, you hit it on the head with the Bills that they're trying to win now. I think for certain teams the age thing is not going to be an issue. You referred to his positional flexibility before, but that's worth kind of noting. I do think he was underrated a bit on that team for a while because of Bain and because of the other talent on that defense, and rightfully so to a degree. But you also get kind of a rare situation where they're basically upgrading from Epinesa if he ends up indeed leaving by drafting Mesidor right away, because probably right away 1-for-1 it's an improvement.
Yeah, definitely agree there. James, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I was gonna mention with Peneza leaving as well. So Ryan again.
Sorry, James.
No, you're good. It's good. I'm glad that we are like-minded. Like there's obvious reasons why you have so many shows and so much outreach because you know what you're talking about. So it's nice that we have the same thought process on some of this. The only thing I guess I will add to it is he is an older prospect. I know that was touched on, but I don't think it's as big of an issue as I've seen some people make it. I've seen some people say they would not draft him before like the third because of his age. And I'm like, the dude's 25. He's not like 40. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty crazy in my opinion. He's definitely a first round pick
yes.
for me. But with that, the Niners are now on the clock, and we're not going to waste too much time. Max Ihenachor, I feel like he is one of the better tackle prospects this year, simply because of his, abilities, his physical abilities, his gifts. Obviously, he's pretty raw, but the Niners just need some offensive line help, and putting him right at right tackle makes a ton of sense for them. So, James, what do you got on this one?
He's a guy that I have not watched too much on, and that kind of upsets me a little bit just because as of late, I'd say within the last week, I've heard his name more times than the last 2 months combined. And he does have, as you mentioned, that flexibility and the raw traits. And when I did look at him, he definitely has upside without a doubt. And but he just seems to be one of those guys that some other people have higher than I do, in my opinion. But once again, I don't know everything there is to know, so I easily could be the one that's not seeing something with him. Um, but with this being, pick 27 with the other tackles already being off the board, I think it makes perfect sense. I think there's a chance you can even slide him over to left tackle with Williams eventually. Obviously ending his career because he's like 36. I know they just figured out his contract, but I know he's getting up there in age as well. Unlike 25. But yeah, I like the pick for this spot.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, I think one thing that's worth noting on him, we talked about the tiers a little bit. We didn't really include him. I would probably, given that I am a little lower on guys like Freeling and Proctor, he's one that's creeping up, but one, you got to be careful with that to some degree sometimes, or it's just kind of right sizing the pick, like we talked about with Falk earlier. I think it's more the latter because the big thing with him is he started playing football very late. So if I'm looking at him as a pro team, I'm thinking, okay, he's got more formative years in the NFL where I can really teach him some things. He can improve more than these other guys that have had a lot longer. Maybe Freeling hadn't played as much in college, had the one full season, but these guys have played a lot more football than he has. So if I've got a good offensive line and an offensive line coach and a good system, I'm thinking I can make his level of improvement a lot higher than some of the other guys that are kind of comparable to him or in this same tier.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm kind of right on that thought process with him as a prospect. So with that though, the Texans are now on the clock, and we're going to take your boy Caleb Banks, James, because originally in our mock we traded this pick for Dexter Lawrence. So I feel like the Houston and that didn't go into account with this because this is my predictive mock. But I do feel like Caleb Banks is going to get drafted in the first round still. I think he is going to fall a little bit because of the foot issue, but I do think a team like Houston would be a perfect team for him because, like we just talked about, they have an insane defensive line as is, and adding a guy like him to the middle just fortifies the strength. So, Ryan, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, I could see them. This is another team that's got some offensive line issues, certainly over the last couple years. But there's really not a great fit here for the offensive line. We just kind of finished the run, and yeah, it's interesting how much this has paralleled our draft because. The Giants had this pick. They took a defensive tackle. It was Woods in that draft, but Houston got Lawrence effectively with this pick, and I did think it was a good strategy. So this is kind of the same strategy where he's saying, "Hey, we're going to put somebody in the middle. He's going to make life easier for outside and behind him, like we've talked about the whole time, and improve what is a strength for them and work on the offensive line and some other things later."
Yeah. James, what do you got for this one?
Yeah, I really like Banks as a prospect, as you mentioned before, and it kind of is one of those. Um, just depends on how you want to build your team, because obviously, don't get me wrong, always start with the trenches. I feel like Houston does need to add to their offensive line, but as I mentioned a few times, I love making a strength even stronger. And when you have in my opinion, best defensive end combo in the league with Will Anderson and Hunter, putting a D tackle that can also push the pocket in there like Banks is just going to make you even more dangerous. And like, who do you block? How do you game plan against that? Once again, it goes back to would you want to face that? And hell no, I wouldn't. So with the linemen kind of being, and D linemen are decently deep in this draft too, to their credit, but there's a lot of other linemen, offensive linemen you can get in the later rounds. And in my opinion, as we mentioned in the other mock drafts and simulations we've done, there is a lot of um, like gap clogging, run stopping D tackles. I think Banks is two tiers above anyone else in terms of the pass rush from the D tackle position. So I feel like this is the one guy that you can get now as opposed to the offensive lineman that you can get later on.
Yeah, definitely. With that, the Chiefs are on the clock, and they are going to go with a cornerback named Colton Hood out of Tennessee. Obviously, trading away um, their number one corner, Trent McDuffie, to the Rams this past offseason. They need some corner help. They also lost two of their other starting corners in free agency to the Rams. Oddly enough, out of all teams, it seems like the Rams just watched the Chiefs film and said, yeah, I think we're going to want their defense. But with that, I think Colton Hood makes a ton of sense here. Obviously, Terrell was ranked higher on this mock, but I do think Hood ends up being the one who sneaks into the back end of the first round. So, Ryan, what do you got for this one?
So I had Kansas City in the draft, and this will be interesting how this goes because there's a few teams that obviously have a good amount of capital in the first round, having two picks in the first round. The Giants now are kind of in the proverbial catbird seat, but then you've got the Browns and the Chiefs are kind of the sneaky one that I don't think people are really keeping as much of an eye on, and they typically do draft pretty well under this current regime. They do have a decent amount of holes for a team that is pretty talented overall, but I think a lot of them are in that back end. When I was kind of taking a deep dive on that roster, you outlined the cornerbacks, but the safeties as well. They need help here. So this is a good value for corner / safety with where we are on the board, because I know we only have 4 picks to go in this mock, but if it continued on to the second round, I think we'd see more secondary here because there's a lot of guys that would fit. But I think that's a good fit for them, and yeah, they've had a good first round, and they're another team like the Eagles that typically draft later, but typically get good values like a Karlaftis. McDuffie was a good pick when they picked him. Obviously Mahomes when they got him, so good value there.
He worked out pretty well, that Mahomes guy.
Yeah, he did okay.
Yeah, and I mean they just drafted that left tackle last year as well that most people saw
Simmons.
as a top 10 pick that, fell all the way down to him. So they do seem to get lucky. James, what do you got to add on this one?
Well, since you mentioned Simmons, I'll add real quick. I did look back at our draft video from last year, and both of us mentioned potentially Simmons to the Lions because we knew Decker's time was limited. So, not saying anything about Tyreek, but just what if we did take him, and how different would this year look, and all that. But in terms of
Very,
Colton
very
Hood,
true.
yeah, in terms of Colton, yeah, you should have listened to us last year, Lions. But in terms of Colton Hood, um, I like him. I do like Terrell a tiny bit more, but Casey definitely needs a corner. So I mean, obviously, if they just prefer Hood, then I mean, so be it.
Yeah, I love Terrell as a player. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think a corner that ran a 4.64 is going in the first round. And obviously, there's a lot of things about that, like he's got some injury stuff or whatever the case. But that's the only reason I didn't take him here. I do like Terrell probably just as much as I like Hood. So that's really the thought process there. Now we have the I don't know why I was going to say the Broncos, the Dolphins up at pick 30. And we went with corner Mansour Delane last time around. And this time we're going to go Casey Concepcion, kind of like the Browns strategy that the Dolphins take a similar one and get their receiver a little bit later. I do think Concepcion is going to sneak into the back end of the first round. It just depends on who. I think the Dolphins makes a ton of sense here. And I'm not going to lie. Look. I think we all can agree after like the top 15, maybe even the top 10, it gets a little harder to predict where exactly players are going to go. So this is based on need, what I think they're going to do, what I think the GM would do in this situation. So I think they go with the best receiver left on the board here. Ryan, what do you got to add on that one?
Well, James hit on this the first time the Dolphins picked, but this has got to be one of the hardest picks to predict because we're at pick 30 and it's a team with a ton of needs. And yeah, you filled one, but did you fill one? Because as you guys highlighted earlier, you could have gone corner here and been reasonably happy because they filled one corner need. They probably need another corner. They need a lot of position help, but I like what I've seen in the draft process from this guy from a character standpoint and from how he's handled some things at a position that maybe lends itself to be a little bit more, the word diva is thrown around a lot with receivers and they often have big personalities, but I like what I've seen from him. So makes me root for him and makes me think that that's a good value for the Dolphins, for a team that has a lot of needs. And yeah, you could almost go right down the board right now and then go and then keep scrolling down and pretty much all of them would be a fit for the Dolphins in the next several picks because it's just it's a lot of needs. No offense to Dolphins fans, that's just where they are right now.
Yeah, I think unfortunately Dolphins fans are right there with you, and they are pissed about it because they basically just sold their whole team. Now, the one thing I will say before I pass it over to you, James, is C.J. Allen is a guy who does not go in the first round in this mock that I do think has a high likelihood of being a first round pick, and I think the Dolphins at 30 would make a ton of sense for him. The only reason I didn't go there is I just think that their GM would go get a weapon at this point because don't get me wrong, I like the receiver class, but I think after Concepcion there is a pretty big drop off. Where I think you can get a linebacker in the second or third round that obviously won't compare to Allen like exactly, but will be a little bit closer. But with that, James, what do you got for this pick?
Yeah, I agree. I do think the receiver drop off is a little more. There's several second round linebackers that I like a lot, actually. The only other person is I would have Omar Cooper Jr. in the same kind of tier as Concepcion, but I think the drop off's just after that, personally. But when, as we mentioned a few times, I feel like the Dolphins could literally pick anyone and it improves their roster, kind of like Ryan said. And with them taking a corner in with their first pick, it makes sense to kind of try to balance things out a little bit and go offense with their second. But I also could potentially see them going, like you mentioned, with the C.J. Allen or even a McNeil Warren to keep adding to that backfield. or defensive back, I should say. And but I don't want to pick on Dolphins fans, but as we mentioned a few times, there's literally no bad pick unless you're taking a punter or a kicker here. But they need literally everything. I wouldn't even potentially say, um, and I know they got Malik Willis, but maybe even a Ty Simpson late, and because then you have that fifth year option. I don't think it would be the first choice, but I could just see it potentially with rookie quarterback contracts being such a big deal in today's league.
Yeah, and honestly, like you guys are gonna laugh when I say this, but Omar Cooper just kind of slipped my mind. I'm not gonna lie to you. Honestly, I think it was the rankings on this. I just kind of forgot about him. He is a first round pick, and I probably go Omar Cooper here over Concepcion with that being the case. Because I do agree with you, James. I think Cooper is up there. And there's a lot of hype about him being picked, around 19 possibly. In that, maybe not to the Panthers, but around that value. So Omar Cooper and CJ Allen, I think, are the two guys in this mock that don't end up going in the first round that I think end up probably do go in the first round. So I think I'm at least two players off as is right now. But with that, Ryan, what do you got for? Or did I already pass it to you, Ryan? I thought I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So 31, we are here with the Patriots, almost there to round this draft out. And honestly, I'm tempted to go Omar Cooper Jr. Just because they do need a receiver.
They do.
But I'm going to go TJ Parker here because that was my pick, and I think I'm going to stick with that simply because edge is probably their biggest need. They lost one of their better edges in free agency this past offseason, and Harold Landry is not getting any younger. So TJ Parker is one of my personal favorite players in this draft. He might be a guy that does kind of slide out of the first round to that early second round. I could see that. Same thing with Concepcion. So you could probably swap those two guys back and forth with Allen and Cooper, and I think that would make a lot of sense. But with that, I go Parker here for all those reasons. So, James, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I love TJ Parker, and we mentioned him a few times as a possibility to the Lions, depending on how the board falls and whatnot. He's a great player. The Patriots can use him. And as always, just default statement, you can always draft the trenches and never really complain. So to keep things a little bit short, because I know we're running up of time a little bit here, that's all I'll say about him.
Yeah, and with that, Ryan, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I'll keep it short too. It does seem very on brand for the Patriots to go this here rather than a receiver. One thing I will add, we'll see what Seattle does, but I assume it's not going to be a receiver, which means the Raiders are going to be on the phone with Omar Cooper still being on the board here in the second round to try to pair him up with his former quarterback.
Yeah, honestly, that was my exact thought the moment that he didn't go. I was like, yeah, but the Raiders are right there, and that would make a ton of sense. So
He played with Kirk Cousins?
Yeah,
true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Omar Cooper is that old. Unfortunately, he's right there with Messidor in terms of age. But with that being said, though, to round this draft out at pick 32, we're gonna go Emmanuel McNeil Warren. Okay, and there's a couple reasons why I do this. Nick Emanwari is more of a nickel in their scheme. He's not really a true safety at all, anyway. I think McNeil Warren adds that needed safety, not depth, but like versatility, I guess is the best way to put it. Because he can kind of cover deep, he can play in the box, and then you have Julian Love, who's more of a deep cover guy, and then you have Emanwari, who's basically just in the box. So I think, given their needs and everything like that, with how the board fell, I think this makes a lot of sense. I could also see them going CJ Allen here. Honestly, I think that would make some sense too. But I did go McNeil Warren just because I think he fits a little bit better with what the Seahawks are doing here. So with that, that's our last pick. But Ryan, I will pass it over to you for our last analysis here.
I had Seattle for the mock draft. This is who I picked. I thought this was a very good fit, and it makes it the way you explained it. It does kind of make it sound a lot like the situation in Tampa. It's kind of right sizing that group. They did lose a safety in the offseason, so there were two clear needs for me: safety and then running back. Running back wasn't a great value here. So I like McNeil Warren and pairing him with, some versatile pieces back there that he'll be able to be a compounding factor.
Definitely. And then James, what do you got for this one?
I agree with Ryan. He took the words out of my mouth again. Kind of like I was gonna say when you mentioned with Tampa Bay how even though you're kind of adding to a strength and it's the same position, it's not actually the same position. Even though they're just titled safeties, they all have their different roles. It's one other thing, and I won't make this a tangent, but it kind of reminds me of the linebacker position a little bit, where I feel the average person thinks a linebacker is a linebacker, and there's not much of a difference between the Mike, Will, and Sam. When, I mean, if you know, you know, there's quite a big difference in terms of responsibilities and even physique that you need to do each position. So I think even though they do have a few safeties, as you mentioned, Jace, he offers a different skill set and will let other people kind of naturally fit into their role to make each of them thrive.
Definitely agree with you there. And with that, that wraps up our final MFN mock draft for the 2026 draft season. Once again, Ryan, we appreciate you for joining us. Before we get out of here, go ahead and let the people know where to find you.
Sports Intel Ryan on X. I've got Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh and Shane Graham's Extra Points on Mondays and Thursdays, respectively, 7 and 9 on Jethro here in Grand Rapids and online at Jethro FM and available via podcast. I don't think we'll be competing with Michigan Football Network the way the schedule is. So tune in to us tomorrow. We'll be on air for the first hour of the draft and be doing some coverage there and kind of following along and following up on some of this stuff that I'll be referring to a lot of the mock draft stuff that we did, because we worked hard on getting this together for you guys. So it was a lot of good research and knowledge for us, especially. So now I'll be able to use that on the air tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely. I love doing the mock drafts because not only is it fun, but you really get to know those later picks, those later guys you wouldn't really know before. With that, like Ryan said, join them tomorrow for the first hour of the draft. We will not be live during the draft. We changed it up a little bit this year. We're going to do a pre-draft show, and then we will do a post-draft show on Friday, which is kind of like a post-first round, pre-second round situation. So we're going to kind of stay up to date on those things, and we will be live during the Lions pick only. So go ahead and join us. It should be right around 9:30, but obviously we will keep you up to date on X and things like that. Hopefully the draft goes by a little bit faster this year. They moved it to 8 minutes instead of 10, so there could be, a little bit difference in the time. So bear with us on that. 9:30 is about where I'm guessing, but it might be a little earlier than that. With that being said, once again, FanSpeak, thank you for the premium account. We appreciate you. Go check those guys out. Their mock draft simulator is a lot of fun, and it's really good. And I like it a lot more than some of the ones that we see all over social media all the time. So check them out. Link is in the description. As always, Fanatics, link is in the description, as well as Stick to the Model with their new Be a GM mode. So with that being said, we appreciate you guys for watching. As always, you can find me at JSoSweet, James at Gullet_James, and both of us at MIFB Network and MichiganFootballNetwork.com. And with that, thanks for watching, and we will see you guys tomorrow.